Baseball remembers its heroes in bright lights and loud headlines, the towering home runs, the perfect games, the walk-off moments that echo for decades. But hidden in the shadows of those highlight reels are the players who were just as extraordinary, if only for a moment, a season, or a stretch of years, players who carried teams on their backs, shattered records, or played the game with a brilliance that burned it briefly for history to fully catch. These are the men whose names might not roll off your tongue, but whose stories, once you hear them, will stick with you forever. They remind us that the beauty of baseball isn't only in the immortals enshrined in Cooperstown. It's in the fleeting flashes of greatness that time almost erased. Today, we're bringing those moments and those players back into the light. Baseball is full of legends whose names echo across generations: Ruth, Mays, Griffey, Jeter. But for every immortal name etched into the sport's collective memory, there are dozens more who burn just as brightly, if only for a fleeting moment, and then slip quietly into the shadows. These are the players who defined series, carried teams, rewrote record books in the margins, and then were left behind by history's highlight reel. Today, we're going to walk through the stories of those forgotten greats, not as dusty statistics or trivia answers, but as real men whose careers remind us that baseball's glory can be as fragile as a single pitch, a single swing, or a single injury. And we'll begin with a man who, for a brief, unforgettable stretch in October, was one of the most dangerous hitters alive. Allen Craig was not the face of the St. Louis Cardinals dynasty years, not with Albert Pujols blasting balls into the night, David Freese cementing his own Game 6 legend, and Chris Carpenter locking down opposing lineups. But in the 2011 World Series, Craig was the quiet assassin. 3 separate times in that fall classic, he stepped into the batter's box late in the game with the score tight, and 3 times he delivered the game-winning RBI, tying a major league record and setting a new standard for clutch hitting in Cardinals history. In 2013, before injuries began to change everything, Craig was a pure hitting machine, batting over .330 in the first half and earning his first All-Star nod. He had a knack for producing in the highest pressure innings, becoming just the 3rd player ever to deliver go-ahead hits in the 6th inning or later of back-to-back World Series games. And yet, ask a casual baseball fan today about Allen Craig, you'll likely get a blank stare. Why? Because when the momentum of a career stops suddenly, the public memory fades just as quickly. Craig's 2013 injury robbed him of his timing, and his brief stint in Boston, where his batting average collapsed to near Mendoza levels, made him an afterthought. The tragedy here isn't just the numbers he didn't have time to accumulate. It's that baseball's myth-making tends to immortalize the heroes who get the whole story arc. Craig's October heroics were the peak of his narrative, but there was never a proper third act, and that's why the casual fan remembers Freese's Game 6, but not the man who made so many other games winnable. There are pitchers whose names inspire instant recognition: Maddox for his precision, Johnson for his intimidation, Pedro for his brilliance. And then there are the pitchers like Chuck Finley, whose careers are so consistently excellent, yet so under-celebrated that even many dedicated fans underestimate them. If you were an Angels fan in the late 80s or 90s, Finley wasn't just a starter. He was the starter. Year after year, he took the mound with a fluid delivery that could suddenly snap into a mid-90s fastball or buckle hitters with off-speed movement that seemed to fall off a cliff. Over 17 seasons, he compiled over 100 wins, more than 2,600 strikeouts, and a career WAR pushing 58, numbers that should have kept his name on short lists of his generation's most reliable arms. And yet, for most outside of Southern California, his story barely registers. Part of that invisibility came from circumstance. Finley spent his prime on Angels teams that really played October baseball, so his performances, no matter how stellar, didn't get the national spotlight. Another part came from the company he kept. His contemporaries included Randy Johnson and Pedro Martinez, to pitchers who redefined dominance and naturally sucked up most of the oxygen in any pitching conversation. But Finley had a unique claim to fame that no amount of overshadowing could erase. He became the first pitcher in MLB history to record for strikeouts in a single inning multiple times, not once, not twice, but 3 times. That's the kind of quirky statistical feat that should live in baseball lore, alongside Ripken's streak or Ryan's no-hitters. But because it happened in Anaheim instead of in a Yankees or Red Sox uniform, it never got the same mythologizing. And maybe that's the thing about players like Finley. Their greatness isn't absent from the record books. It's just hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to look past the biggest headlines and remember. Some careers burn so bright that their sudden end feels less like a retirement and more like a story. Torn from the middle of the book, the pages ripped out before the plot could resolve. Brandon Webb's career was exactly that, a rise to the very peak of pitching dominance followed by a fall so abrupt that it still feels jarring over a decade later. By the mid-2000s, Webb was the face of Arizona's rotation, a sinker ball specialist whose pitches seemed to obey different laws of physics. In 2006, he didn't just win the NL Cy Young Award. He did it with a blend of control, movement, and mental toughness that made hitters look helpless. Then he followed that up with back-to-back second-place Cy Young finishes in 2007 and 2008, cementing himself as one of the league's elite arms. There was a moment in 2008 when it felt like Webb was untouchable. He started the season with 9 straight wins, and when he got locked in, his sinker forced ground balls as if gravity itself had a vendetta against opposing batters. The highlighting of that dominance came with a 42-inning scoreless streak in 2007, placing him among a small, historic group of pitchers to ever reach that mark. And then, almost without warning, it was over. Shoulder issues crept in, the kind that no amount of rehab or grit could fix. In 2009, he threw just 4 innings. That was it. For a pitcher at the height of his power, the loss was seismic. We often talk about what could have been in baseball, but Webb might be one of the purest examples. Not because his numbers weren't impressive, they were, but because you can see, in stark contrast, what happens when a Hall of Fame trajectory meets the harsh reality of the human body's limits. In an alternate timeline, Webb might have been a 250-win ace, a postseason fixture, a name kids would wear on the back of their jerseys. Instead, his legacy lives in the memories of those few years when he was untouchable, and in the reminder that in baseball, even the brightest lights can flicker out before you've even had the chance to blink. Some players earn respect for their numbers, others for their championships, but every so often, a player's greatest victory has nothing to do with the scoreboard. Trey Mancini came into the league as a bright spot for a Baltimore Orioles team that was heading into a deep rebuild from 2016 to 2019. While the franchise was shedding veterans and struggling to find an identity, Mancini was the one constant, a hitter who could punish mistakes, work counts, and quietly put up batting averages and on-base numbers that outpaced much of the league. He wasn't flashy, but he was steady, and in a clubhouse where wins were scarce, steadiness mattered. Then, in March 2020, his life took a turn that no spring training report could have prepared fans for: a diagnosis of stage 3 colon cancer. Suddenly, the season was gone, replaced by surgery, chemotherapy, and the kind of fight that makes facing a 98 miles per hour fastball seem trivial. For 6 months, he battled, not for stats or contracts, but for his health. And when he returned to baseball in 2021, it wasn't just a comeback, it was a statement. Hitting 21 home runs that year and driving in 71 runs wasn't just production. It was proof that his determination, both physical and mental, hadn't been eroded by the months away. His AL Comeback Player of the Year award was more than a plaque. It was a symbol of hope for anyone watching who had their own fight to endure. Beyond the diamond, Mancini turned his platform into a megaphone for awareness, working closely with the Colorectal Cancer Alliance and becoming a voice for early detection and patient support. And yet, because he played during one of the Orioles' bleakest competitive stretches, his story never got the national playoff stage it deserved. In another era, He might have been the emotional heartbeat of a contender. Instead, he became something rarer, a reminder that sometimes the most important victories in baseball happen far away from the field, in hospitals, in quiet moments of recovery, in the resolve to step back into the batter's box when the odds told you not to. There are pitchers whose arms seem forged for dominance, whose raw stuff makes even seasoned hitters look like they're swinging underwater. Josh Johnson was one of them, at 6 even, with a mid-90s fastball that rode hard through the zone and a slider that could vanish under a bat at the last instant. Johnson had the kind of arsenal that made scouts salivate and opposing hitters pray for a day off. During his peak with the Florida and later Miami Marlins between 2005 and 2012, there were stretches where he was as close to unhittable as a starting pitcher could get. In 2009, he posted a 15-5 record with a crisp 3.3 era, earning his first All-Star selection. But it was the 2010 season where he reached true ace status, leading the National League with a microscopic .30 era, a number that reads like a relic from a dead ball era box score. The Marlins were never a marquee franchise, and Johnson's brilliance often went unnoticed outside Florida. Still, inside the game, his value was no secret. The Toronto Blue Jays proved that when they pulled off a massive 12-player trade in 2012 to acquire him alongside Mark Burrell and Jose Reyes. For a moment, it looked like Johnson might be the anchor for a new at least contender. But then came the injuries, triceps inflammation, forearm strain, and eventually the nightmare of 3 separate Tommy John surgeries. For a pitcher whose career was defined by electric stuff, those operations were like slowly dimming a floodlight until there was nothing left but a faint glow by the time he was out of baseball. Johnson's numbers to All-Star nods, a career era just above 3 o'clock, hinted at what could have been, but they didn't tell the full story. That story is one of potential cut short, of a pitcher whose ceiling was sky high, but whose body kept pulling the ladder out from under him. In another timeline, Josh Johnson is remembered alongside the greats of his generation. In ours, he's a name that flashes brightly in the memories of those who watched him pitch in his prime, then fades just as quickly into the shadows of what if. Baseball's dead ball era is often painted in sepia tones, bunts, steals, and soft liners rather than tape measure blasts, but hidden in those grainy box scores are players whose skill sets could translate to any era. Sherry McGee was one of them. A 5-tool star before the term was even part of baseball's vocabulary. Playing for the Philadelphia Phillies in the early 1900s, McGee could do it all: hit for average, drive in runs, swipe bases, and cover ground in the field with a quick first step and a strong arm. In 1910, he put together a season that would stand out in any century, leading the National League in batting average, RBIs, runs scored, and ops while coming in second in doubles and triples. That's the kind of across-the-board dominance that usually cements a player's place in the game's mythology. But McGee's story took a turn that history wasn't kind enough to forget. In 1911, in a moment of frustration over a called third strike, he struck and knocked out umpire Bill Finneran. The league suspended him for the rest of the season, a punishment that not only cost him valuable time in his prime, but also permanently attached a shadow to his legacy. It's one of those incidents that, fair or not, can eclipse even the brightest achievements. McGee still retired with a .291 average for RBI titles and a stolen base record for the Phillies in the 20th century. Yet his name barely registers today outside of deep baseball history circles. In a way, his career is a reminder of how reputation in sports is a fragile thing, built over years, but vulnerable to being reshaped in a single moment. And in an era when players like Ty Cobb and Honus Wagner dominated headlines, McGee's combination of brilliance and controversy simply couldn't compete for space in the public's memory. Baseball history loves its rare feats, those statistical unicorns that stand alone in the record books. Fred Lynn didn't just claim one, he seized it in his very first full season, in 1975. As a rookie with the Boston Red Sox, Lynn didn't merely meet expectations, he detonated them. That year, he became the first player in Major League history to win both Rookie of the Year and Most Valuable Player in the same season. Think about that. In a league that's been around for over a century, only one man had ever managed to burst onto the scene with that level of dominance. And Lynn's game was the complete package, a smooth, natural swing that sprayed line, drives to all fields, legitimate home run power, and the kind of defensive grace in center field that turned difficult plays into highlights. That rookie year, he hit .331, racked up 47 doubles, and drove in 105 runs, all while patrolling the outfield with a gold glove on his resume before he even had time to unpack his career suitcase. He didn't fade after that, either. 9 straight All-Star selections from 1975 to 1983. Multiple gold gloves, and in 1983, another piece of history, the first Grand Slam ever hit in an All-Star game, earning him MVP honors there as well. But Lynn's career is also a cautionary tale about how the grind of the game can chip away at even the most gifted athletes. From 1985 to 1990, he never played more than 124 games in a season, as injuries nibbled away at his availability and, eventually, his production in a different timeline. Lynn might have stacked up numbers to rival the all-time greats in center field. Instead, he finished with a very respectable .883 average, nearly 2,000 hits, and a career OPS plus of 129, more than enough to prove his place among his era's elite. But because his prime came alongside other iconic center fielders, and his health kept him from building a sustained statistical mountain, Lynn's name doesn't get the instant reverence it deserves. He's not a trivia answer. He's a reminder that sometimes the peak comes early, burns hot, and leaves the rest of the career trying to keep pace with its own legend. Some players spend their entire careers carrying a single defining label: slugger, speedster, glove wizard, but Ellis Burks was the rare kind of ball player who refused to fit into just one box. He could hit for average, hit for power, run, throw, and field with equal effectiveness. A true five-tool threat in an era overflowing with star outfielders. Coming up with the Boston Red Sox in the late 1980s, Burks quickly proved he wasn't just another name on the depth chart. He was a difference maker. Over 18 seasons, he piled up 350 home runs, 1,100 plus RBIs, 181 stolen bases, and a lifetime .991 batting average. A stat line that would have made him the face of a franchise in many markets. His peak came in 1996 with the Colorado Rockies, a season so balanced and so dominant that it still feels underrated. A .3 for average, 40 home runs, 30 steals, and 200 hits, making him just the second player in MLB history to combine those numbers in a single season. He could change a game in any number of ways: driving a ball into the seats, swiping a key base, gunning down a runner from right field, and his versatility allowed him to be an asset for 5 different franchises. And yet, the timing of his career worked against his legacy. Burks played in the same era as Tony Gwynn, Larry Walker, Ken Griffey Jr., and Frank Thomas, names that monopolized headlines and highlight reels. Even when he was producing at an elite level, his accomplishments were often buried under the sheer star power surrounding him. That's the quiet tragedy of Ellis Burks' career. He was a player who could do almost everything, but history tends to remember the specialists, the players who made their mark in one signature way. Burks' mark was being great at everything, and paradoxically, that's part of why he's not remembered as much as he should be. In today's game, strikeouts are just part of the landscape. Even the league's best hitters can fan 150 times a year without raising an eyebrow. That's what makes Joe Sewell's career almost mythical by modern standards. Playing from 1920 to 1933, Sewell was the embodiment of bat control, a hitter whose precision bordered on the surreal. Over more than 7,100 career at-bats, he struck out just 114 times. That's not a typo. It averages out to 1 strikeout every 60 to .6 at-bats. a rate so far beyond today's norms that it almost feels like a stat from another sport. His 1930 season at age 34 was the crown jewel of this contact mastery. Just 3 strikeouts in 503 at-bats, setting a record of 167.7 at-bats per strikeout that still stands. Even more astonishing, in 1929, he went 115 consecutive games without striking out, a streak that will likely never be touched in an era where pitchers throw harder and nastier than ever. Sewell wasn't just a novelty, he was a productive hitter, batting .312 for his career and helping his teams win to World Series titles. But because his game revolved around making contact, instead of mashing home runs, his achievements don't resonate in today's highlight-driven culture. Playing in the same era as Babe Ruth didn't help either. The public's attention was locked on the long ball, while Sewell was quietly turning in seasons of offensive efficiency that would make modern analytics departments salivate. In many ways, he was ahead of his time, a player whose discipline and approach would be worth millions in today's strikeout-heavy environment, but who instead remains a near-forgotten figure from baseball's past. When people talk about the greatest shortstops in baseball history, the conversation almost always starts with names like Ellis Burks, Cal Ripken Jr., Derek Jeter. But tucked just beneath those marquee legends is Arky Vaughan, a player whose offensive output at a premium defensive position was so extraordinary that it still demands attention even decades after his final game. Vaughn patrolled shortstop in the 1930s and early 40s primarily for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and brought a bat to the position that few could match. In 1935, he authored one of the most absurd stat lines ever posted by a shortstop, a .385 batting average and a .491 on-base percentage, both still Pirates records to this day. That wasn't a fluke. Vaughn was a model of consistency, batting .318 for his career and earning 9 consecutive All-Star selections from 1934 to 1942. He led the league in runs and triples 3 times each, adding speed and gap power to his already elite ability to get on base. What made him even more valuable was that he did this in an era when shortstops were expected to be glove-first, light-hitting defenders. Vaughn flipped that script entirely, but his timing was both a blessing and a curse. He followed in the massive shadow of Ellis Wagner in Pittsburgh, meaning even his brilliance felt like it was happening on a smaller stage. And being a pre-World War player, his career didn't get the same television or photographic saturation that later stars enjoyed. To the modern fan, Vaughn's name might sound like just another chapter in a dusty record book. But the truth is he was one of the most complete offensive shortstops the game has ever seen. Had he played in a media-saturated era, his numbers would be plastered across every greatest ever conversation. Instead, his legacy rests quietly in the history books, waiting for the curious to rediscover it. Baseball has seen plenty of reinventions, pitchers who became hitters, hitters who became managers, but few transformations were as stunning as Lefty O'Doul's. He started his career on the mound, a promising left-handed pitcher in the early 1920s, until arm injuries threatened to end his time in the majors before it really began. For many players of that era, that would have been the end of the story, but O'Doul rewrote his script entirely, reinventing himself as an outfielder and discovering a hitting talent so pure it would land him among the greatest contact hitters in baseball history. His career batting average, .349, still 6th best all time. In 1929, he nearly touched .400, hitting .398 while piling up 250 for hits, a number that remains the National League's single-season record in the modern era. And he didn't just slap singles. He had pop, hitting 30 home runs that same year while striking out only 19 times. In a league that now accepts 150 strikeouts from its sluggers, that kind of bat control borders on the unbelievable. He added another batting title in 1932 and became one of the most feared hitters in either league during his peak. Yet, for all that, O'Doul is more of a trivia answer than a household name. Part of that is timing. His prime came in the late 1920s and early 30s, a period dominated by the Ruthian home run boom. Part of it is longevity as a full-time position player. His career was relatively short, so the county's stats never piled high enough to force his way into the Hall of Fame conversation. But maybe the most lasting part of his legacy isn't even from his MLB days. O'Doul went on to play a huge role in spreading baseball internationally, particularly in Japan, where he helped foster the sport's growth for decades. In the end, Lefty O'Doul was proof that greatness can come in more than one act, and that even if the spotlight doesn't stay on you, the game can carry your influence far beyond the lines of the field. The summer of 1998 will always be remembered for one thing: the home run race between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa. It was a circus, a national obsession, and it swallowed everything in its path, which is why Greg Vaughn's incredible season that year has been largely erased from casual memory. While the baseball world was glued to every swing of McGwire and Sosa, Vaughn, playing for the San Diego Padres, was quietly putting together one of the most powerful campaigns in team history: 50 home runs, 119 RBIs, and a .27 to batting average. He wasn't a one-dimensional slugger either. Vaughn was a tough, disciplined hitter who could punish mistakes and rise to the moment. That season helped propel the Padres all the way to the World Series, and for San Diego fans, Vaughn's production was as critical as any other player's. But in the broader baseball consciousness, he was competing for attention against a Stroy-Dara spectacle that drowned out anything short of a record-breaking total. Vaughn's career numbers: 355 home runs, 4 All-Star selections, and a Silver Slugger award, speak to a consistency that's hard to come by, especially in an era where offensive explosions were both celebrated and eventually scrutinized. In 1999, he made history as the first player ever traded after a 50-homer season, heading to Cincinnati and proving the bat was still hot with another 45 home runs. Yet, despite those milestones, Vaughn's name doesn't surface often in conversations about the era's great power hitters. It's the curse of timing to hit 50 home runs in a season where someone else hit 7-0. It's like climbing Everest on the same day someone plants a flag on Mars. Impressive, but inevitably overshadowed. Greg Vaughn deserves better than being a footnote in someone else's headline. When you think of the great third baseman of the 1960s, certain names come up instantly: Brooks Robinson with his highlight reel defense, Ron Santo with his consistency, Eddie Matthews with his power. But in the thick of that golden era for the position stood Ken Boyer, the St. Louis Cardinals captain and quiet force, a player whose skill set was so balanced it almost defied simple categorization. Boyer could hit for average, hit for power, and play Gold Glove caliber defense at the hot corner. And in 1964, he put it all together in an MVP season. That year, he batted .295 with 24 home runs and an NL Best 119 RBIs, leading the Cardinals to their first World Series championship in nearly 2 decades. In October, he didn't just show up, he delivered, most memorably with a grand slam in Game 4 against the Yankees. That swung the series' momentum squarely toward St. Louis. By the time the Cardinals sealed the title in Game 7, Boyer had collected 3 hits, including another home run, and scored 3 runs in the clincher. Over his career, he earned 11 All-Star selections and 5 Gold Gloves, finishing with a .87 average, a .349 OBP, and a career WAR over 62, numbers that, in another context, might have built a much larger legacy. But Boyer played in the long shadows cast by Cardinals icons like Stan Musial before him and Bob Gibson alongside him. His greatness was steady, not flashy, and in the years since his career ended, that steadiness has meant his name often gets lost in the shuffle when talking about the franchise's legends. Boyer's story is a reminder that championships aren't built solely on the supernova seasons of a select few stars. Sometimes they're forged in the dependable brilliance of players who do everything well, even if history doesn't shout their names quite as loudly. Baseball loves its legends, the names that fill Cooperstown plaques. that appear on endless highlight reels that parents pass down to their kids like sacred stories. But the game is deeper than that. For every Ruth or Griffey or Jeter, there are dozens of players who were every bit as essential to their teams, whose careers were filled with moments of brilliance, whose contributions shaped pennant races, inspired teammates, and thrilled fans, yet whose names have been eroded by time, circumstance, or the sheer volume of noise in any given era. Alan Craig's clutch October heroics, Chuck Finley's rare feats in relative obscurity, Brandon Webb's meteoric rise and heartbreakingly early fall, Trey Mancini's victory over cancer that went far beyond the scoreboard, Josh Johnson's Excalibur dominance interrupted by injury after injury, Sherry McGee's dead ball mastery, tarnished by one regrettable moment, Fred Lynn's rookie year miracle, Ellis Burks' all-around greatness hidden in the shadows of louder stars, Joe Sewell's impossible contact skill in a strikeout-obsessed game, Arky Vaughan's offensive fireworks from a position that wasn't supposed to produce them, Lefty O'Doul's reinvention and international influence, Greg Vaughn's overlooked 50-homer season, Ken Boyer's championship leadership. These aren't just statistics, they're stories of human beings who reached extraordinary heights, only to have their achievements muted by history's selective memory. And maybe that's the lesson. Greatness doesn't always live in the spotlight. Sometimes it's in the players you have to dig a little deeper to remember. And in rediscovering them, we also rediscover a truth about baseball itself, that the game's magic isn't just in its most famous names, but in the countless others who, for a season or a career, played it at a level worthy of being remembered forever.